America's presidents helped turn us into the greatest country in the world, but they weren't perfect. Here's every president's biggest regret and what you can learn from them. George Washington was the original American hero who turned down being king to set up our democracy. He could have crushed any opposition, but he chose to build something bigger than himself. When it came to slavery, though, Washington held back. Despite knowing it was wrong, he worried too much about what others would think if he made bold moves to end it. Even the greatest leaders sometimes miss their biggest opportunity because they fear backlash. This fear of criticism doesn't just hurt your legacy. It enables the very problems you know need fixing. While your mind screams, "This is wrong," your hesitation allows injustice to continue. Don't let other people's opinions stop you from making your boldest moves, especially when your gut tells you it's right. John Adams was the brilliant mind behind many of our founding principles, but he was also painfully honest and often rubbed people the wrong way. When Adams felt threatened by criticism, he signed the Alien and Sedition Acts, basically making it illegal to criticize the government. A guy who helped create freedom of speech ended up temporarily destroying it to protect his reputation. The warning signs were clear. When he started seeing critics as enemies rather than just opponents, he was headed down a dangerous path. Don't sacrifice your core principles for short-term wins. They'll come back to haunt you, and history will remember the betrayal more than whatever you were trying to achieve. Speaking of principles being tested, Thomas Jefferson faced his own moment of truth. Thomas Jefferson was the mastermind who wrote that all men are created equal, and doubled America's size with one brilliant purchase. He was a visionary, but even visionaries have regrets. To fight British and French aggression, Jefferson passed the Embargo Act, completely shutting down American trade. It was like using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. It crushed our own economy instead of solving the problem. The move nearly bankrupted the country and accomplished almost nothing. Most people make this same mistake. They go all in on untested ideas because they look perfect on paper. Before you bet the farm on a big idea, test it on a smaller scale first. What works in theory often fails spectacularly in practice. While Jefferson learned about economic caution, his successor would learn about military preparedness. James Madison was the father of our Constitution, a genius on paper, but someone who struggled when facing real-world chaos. Despite his intellectual brilliance, Madison sometimes missed the practical side of leadership. When Madison led America into the War of 1812, he did it with an unprepared army and navy. The British ended up burning down the White House, and Madison had to run for his life. His mistake? Believing that being right was enough, he thought Britain would respect American neutrality without the muscle to back it up. Even the smartest guy in the room needs to do the prep work, especially when lives are on the line. Always prepare like your life depends on it, because sometimes it actually does. Your brilliant plan means nothing if you lack the resources to execute it properly. After Madison's wartime struggles, James Monroe would face a different kind of battle. James Monroe gave us the Monroe Doctrine, basically telling Europe to stay out of America's business. He projected strength abroad, but missed a growing cancer at home. Despite seeing the damage slavery caused, Monroe didn't use his power to limit its spread. By avoiding the problem, he let it grow until it nearly destroyed the nation his friends had built. We all face this temptation to kick difficult problems down the road, hoping they'll magically resolve themselves or become someone else's headache. Some problems don't go away if you ignore them. They just get bigger and more destructive. Face your biggest challenges before they own you and limit your options later. Monroe's diplomatic approach wouldn't work for his successor, who learned that influence requires more than just being right. John Quincy Adams was the son of a president and possibly the smartest man to ever hold the office. He had brilliant ideas, but couldn't get anyone to follow him. Adams had a vision for American infrastructure and education that was decades ahead of his time, but he couldn't convince Congress to support him. All that brainpower was wasted because he never mastered the art of influence. The obstacle that blocked him? He saw compromise as weakness and treated people who disagreed with him as stupid or corrupt. Being right isn't enough. You need to bring people along with you. The most brilliant idea in the world is worthless if you can't persuade others to help implement it. While Adams couldn't master influence, the next president would show how too much influence can be dangerous. Andrew Jackson was a self-made man who rose from nothing to become a war hero and champion of the common man. He was tough as nails and took no prisoners. Jackson's determination to remove Native Americans led to the Trail of Tears, where thousands died on a forced march from their homeland. His ambition to expand America's territory came at a terrible human cost that stains his legacy. The systemic problem was clear. Jackson confused what he could do with what he should do. Just because you have the power to accomplish something doesn't mean you should use it, especially when it tramples other people's basic rights. Always weigh the cost of your ambition. Some prices are too high to pay, no matter how great the reward seems. While Jackson's leadership was too harsh, his successor would learn that hesitation can be just as dangerous. Martin Van Buren was known as the Little Magician for his political skills. He was the first president born as an American citizen and spoke English as his second language. But when the Panic of 1837 hit, Van Buren moved too slowly, and the economic depression lasted for years. His careful, methodical approach made sense in normal times, but failed during a crisis. Watch for this warning sign in your own leadership. If you're still gathering information while everything burns around you, you've waited too long. When disaster strikes, you need to act fast. The longer you wait, the worse things get. Imperfect action today beats perfect action tomorrow when the house is on fire. Crisis response is critical, but William Henry Harrison never got the chance to face one. William Henry Harrison was the oldest president elected until Reagan, a war hero who won a landslide victory, promising to bring America into a new age. Harrison gave the longest inaugural address in history, a 2-hour speech in freezing rain without a coat. He caught pneumonia and died just 31 days into office, never accomplishing anything he planned. The personal obstacle that killed him? Pride. He wanted to prove he was still tough and vigorous despite his age, so he refused to look weak by cutting his speech short or wearing proper clothing. Life is short and unpredictable. Don't waste your shot when you get it by trying to prove something to others that doesn't actually matter. While Harrison's presidency was cut short, John Tyler's full term taught him about choosing battles. John Tyler was the first vice president to take over after a president's death, nicknamed his accidency, because no one expected him to be in charge. Tyler stood by his principles so firmly that his entire party kicked him out, leaving him powerless for most of his presidency. He became the first president to face impeachment threats because he refused to compromise. The common mistake Tyler made, treating every disagreement as a hill to die on. Standing your ground is admirable, but pick your battles wisely or you'll end up fighting alone. Save your absolute stands for the truly essential issues. Compromise on smaller matters to build the political capital you'll need for the big fights. Tyler's stubborn approach contrasts with James K. Polk, who planned everything meticulously. James K. Polk promised to serve just one term and accomplish exactly 4 goals, then did exactly what he said and retired. By aggressively expanding America's territory, Polk added California and the Southwest, but also intensified the debate over slavery and new territories. His short-term win created long-term problems that eventually led to the Civil War. Always plan for the long game. Today's victory can become tomorrow's disaster if you don't consider the second and third-order consequences of your actions. Planning ahead matters, but Zachary Taylor would learn that decisive action is just as important. But before we get into that, if you're sick of being average and want to unlock your full potential, subscribe to Forge Theory so you don't miss any of our future videos. Zachary Taylor was a war hero who had never even voted before becoming president, a political outsider who brought a soldier's directness to the White House. Taylor died suddenly after just 16 months in office, leaving many of his plans unfinished. Despite being a decisive military commander, he hesitated too long on the political battlefield. The problem that stopped him? Analysis paralysis, believing he needed to understand the situation completely before taking bold action. Don't let indecision rob you of your impact. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Quick wins matter. Identify one meaningful action you can take immediately while you develop your longer strategy. Taylor's successor would face moral compromises that would haunt his legacy. Millard Fillmore rose from extreme poverty to the presidency, a self-made man who taught himself to read using the Bible and eventually passed the bar exam. Fillmore signed the Fugitive Slave Act to preserve the Union, requiring Northerners to return escaped slaves to the South. He compromised his morals for short-term peace and forever stained his reputation. The pressure was immense. The South threatened secession, and everyone demanded Fillmore save the Union at any cost. Never trade your values for temporary harmony. Some compromises cost too much. When pressure mounts to abandon your principles, that's exactly when they matter most. Moral compromise would become a theme for the next president as well. Franklin Pierce was charming and handsome, a skilled politician who suffered terrible personal tragedy when his only surviving son was killed in a train accident right before his inauguration. Pierce's support of the Kansas-Nebraska Act led to Bleeding Kansas, with pro- and anti-slavery settlers killing each other in the streets. He didn't anticipate how his policies would play out in real life, a key warning sign he missed when people started arming themselves before the bill even passed. Always think 3 steps ahead. Your decisions have consequences far beyond what you can see today. Play out the chess game in your mind. If I do X, they'll respond with Y, which will trigger Z. Pierce's poor decisions would be overshadowed by his successor's complete leadership failure. James Buchanan was the only president who never married, skilled at political maneuvering, but failed when decisive leadership was needed most. As Southern states began seceding from the Union, Buchanan did basically nothing, claiming he had no power to stop them. His inaction allowed the Civil War to become inevitable. The systemic obstacle he faced was real. The Constitution wasn't clear about secession, but his fatal mistake was using that as an excuse for inaction when creativity and courage were needed. When crisis hits, people need a leader, not excuses. Take charge when everything is falling apart, or step aside for someone who will. Buchanan's failure cleared the way for perhaps our greatest president, who still had his own regrets. Abraham Lincoln was a self-educated man who rose from poverty to save the Union. His wisdom and resolve kept America from permanently splitting apart. Despite personally opposing slavery, Lincoln waited over a year into the Civil War before issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. He hesitated because he feared alienating border states. The obstacle he faced was legitimate. Act too soon and he might lose the war. Wait too long and miss the moral imperative. Even Lincoln learned that when you have power, use it. The perfect moment you're waiting for may never come. Timing matters, but purpose and principle matter more. Don't wait for risk-free opportunities that don't exist. Lincoln's bold leadership stands in stark contrast to his successor's combative approach. Andrew Johnson was a Southern Democrat who remained loyal to the Union. He rose from extreme poverty and never attended a single day of school. Johnson's constant fighting with Congress led to his impeachment and destroyed his ability to help reunite the country after the Civil War. His stubborn refusal to compromise crippled his presidency. He confused stubbornness with strength and saw compromise as weakness. Build bridges instead of burning them. You can't lead effectively when you're at war with your own team. Johnson's confrontational style gave way to Grant's problem with loyalty. Ulysses S. Grant was America's greatest general, whose military genius saved the Union during the Civil War, but his trusting nature hurt his presidency. Grant appointed his friends to key positions, and many of them turned out to be corrupt, creating scandal after scandal. His loyalty to friends who didn't deserve it tarnished his reputation. The warning signs were everywhere: people getting suspiciously rich, whispers of kickbacks, but Grant refused to see them because he valued loyalty above everything. Choose your inner circle carefully. The people around you will make or break your success. Trust, but verify, especially when money and power are involved. While Grant struggled with corrupt allies, Hayes faced abandoning a critical mission. Rutherford B. Hayes was known for his integrity and promise to serve only one term. Hayes ended Reconstruction to heal the nation, but this allowed Southern states to strip away Black Americans' rights. By abandoning Reconstruction before it was complete, he undid much of the progress made after the Civil War. The objection many make here is, sometimes you have to cut your losses and move on. But when you start something important, see it through. Half-finished missions often create more problems than they solve. The true cost of abandoning your mission isn't just losing what you've invested, it's allowing the situation to become worse than before you started. Hayes couldn't complete his mission, but James A. Garfield never got the chance to start his. James A. Garfield was a brilliant scholar who rose from extreme poverty to the highest office. Just 4 months into his presidency, Garfield was shot by an assassin and died slowly over the next 2 months. His potential was cut short before he could make his mark. Here's a problem many leaders face. You're lulled into believing you have time to make your mark later, after you get settled, after you handle the immediate crisis, after you build more support. Life gives no guarantees. Act with urgency because you might not get tomorrow. Your quick win: identify the one thing you'd regret not tackling if you were gone tomorrow and start it today. Garfield's successor would learn about missed opportunities for moral leadership. Chester A. Arthur was a party boss who was chosen as vice president to appease the political machine. He surprised everyone by becoming a reformer once in office. Despite personal growth on corruption, Arthur failed to push for civil rights as Black Americans lost ground in the South. He knew what was right, but lacked the courage to fight for it. The voice in his head saying, "I'm already fighting one big battle with civil service reform. I can't afford another fight right now. Standing up for what's right is never convenient. Do it anyway." The cost of moral cowardice always exceeds the price of moral courage, even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. Arthur's missed opportunity for moral leadership would be echoed in Cleveland's heavy-handed crisis response. Grover Cleveland was the first president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, known for his honesty and moral character in a corrupt era. When railroad workers went on strike, Cleveland sent in federal troops, resulting in deaths and crushing the labor movement. His excessive force turned public opinion against him. The key mistake? He saw only 2 options: do nothing or use maximum force. Know when to dial back. Using a hammer, when a handshake would work, destroys trust that takes years to rebuild. Master the pace approach to conflicts. Pause before reacting. Assess multiple options. Consider long-term consequences. Engage proportionally. Cleveland's heavy-handedness contrasts with Benjamin Harrison's failure to read the room. Benjamin Harrison was the grandson of a president, a brilliant lawyer, and the last president to sport a full beard. Harrison pushed through extremely high tariffs that voters hated, costing him re-election and his party's control of Congress. He was so focused on his policy that he ignored the public mood. The warning sign he missed? When members of his own party started warning him about voter backlash, and he dismissed them as lacking conviction. Always check the temperature of the room. Being tone deaf to your audience can derail even your best plans. Even the right policy implemented in the wrong way or at the wrong time becomes the wrong policy. Harrison's overreach on tariffs parallels William McKinley's imperial ambitions. William McKinley was a Civil War veteran who brought America onto the world stage. He led during a time of growing American power. After defeating Spain, McKinley annexed the Philippines, pulling America into a brutal guerrilla war and making us a colonial power. His vision for American greatness led us into a conflict that contradicted our own founding principles. The systemic obstacle was tempting, a world shifting toward empire building with spoils for the taking. Know where to draw the line. Not every opportunity needs to be seized. Power without restraint becomes corruption, and victories that betray your values aren't really victories at all. McKinley's expansionism would be followed by Roosevelt's expansion of presidential power. Theodore Roosevelt was the youngest president ever, a force of nature who lived by the motto, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Roosevelt stretched presidential powers to their limits, setting precedents that changed the office forever. While effective in the short term, his power moves altered the constitutional balance. The common mistake here is confusing what works with what lasts. Roosevelt got things done, but at what long-term cost to the system? When pushing boundaries, respect the rules, breaking the system to get your way can have consequences long after you're gone. True leadership builds sustainable processes, not just immediate results. Roosevelt's bold approach contrasts sharply with William Howard Taft's failure to maintain his base. William Howard Taft was the only person to serve as both President and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was brilliant, but struggled with political instincts. Taft alienated progressive Republicans, including his former mentor Roosevelt, splitting the party and losing his re-election. He forgot who brought him to the dance. When his early policy moves upset his supporters, and he dismissed their concerns as political noise. Don't forget the people who supported you early. Regularly check in with your core supporters, not just to inform them, but to genuinely listen before making major decisions. Taft's political missteps would be overshadowed by Woodrow Wilson's moral blind spot. Woodrow Wilson was a former university president with a PhD, an intellectual who reshaped America's role in the world. Despite his progressive reputation, under his reign, the federal government was segregated and ignored racial violence. He led for some Americans while turning his back on others. The mental obstacle many powerful people face is the same, believing that because you're fair to people in your inner circle, you're fair to everyone. True leadership means serving everyone, not just the people who look like you or agree with you. Your leadership is judged not by how you treat the powerful, but by how you respond to the needs of the most vulnerable. Wilson's high-minded ideals contrast with Warren G. Harding's struggle with personal connections. Warren G. Harding was handsome and charismatic. winning the largest victory margin of his era by promising a return to normalcy after World War I. Harding appointed corrupt friends who stole millions, creating massive scandals he didn't live to see fully exposed. His loyalty to the wrong people destroyed his legacy. The social pressure was real. These were lifelong friends who had supported him when nobody else would. But cut toxic relationships early, some friends are too expensive to keep. While Harding missed the warning signs of corruption, Calvin Coolidge ignored the warning signs of inequality. Calvin Coolidge was known as Silent Cal for his quiet demeanor. He believed that government should interfere as little as possible in people's lives. While the economy boomed for some during the Roaring '20s, Coolidge ignored growing economic inequality that contributed to the coming Great Depression. He was so focused on what was working that he missed what was breaking. The problem? Confirmation bias, seeking only evidence that supports your existing beliefs while dismissing warning signs. Look beyond the surface success. What appears golden may be rotting underneath. Make a habit of actively seeking out information that challenges your assumptions. Coolidge's oversight would pale compared to Herbert Hoover's inability to adapt to crisis. Herbert Hoover was a self-made millionaire who had fed starving Europeans after World War I. He had one of the most impressive resumes of any president. When the Great Depression hit, Hoover stuck to traditional solutions long after they clearly weren't working. His reluctance to try bold new approaches deepened and lengthened the economic disaster. The obstacle he couldn't overcome was his own successful past. The methods that had made him a business genius and humanitarian hero were now failing him, but he couldn't imagine a different way. When the old playbook fails, throw it out. Adaptation isn't just helpful, it's survival. Success in one era can become a liability in another if you can't evolve your thinking. Hoover's rigid thinking contrasts sharply with Franklin D. Roosevelt's moral compromise during war. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the only president elected 4 times. He led America through the Great Depression and most of World War II, transforming the role of government. Despite his commitment to freedom, Roosevelt ordered the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, giving in to fear and prejudice. Even our greatest leaders can make terrible mistakes when they abandon their values during a crisis. The external pressure was enormous: Pearl Harbor, war hysteria, and genuine security concerns. But never let panic or fear override your core principles. They're most important when they're hardest to follow. Crisis doesn't create character, it reveals it. Roosevelt's wartime decisions would be followed by Harry S. Truman's Cold War misjudgments. Harry S. Truman was a plain-speaking man who never went to college. He made some of the most consequential decisions in American history, including using atomic weapons. Truman underestimated Soviet intentions after World War II, leading to heightened tensions and a more dangerous Cold War. His misreading of Stalin's goals shaped decades of conflict. The mistake many leaders make? Projecting their own rationality onto opponents who operate from completely different values and incentives. Know your enemies better than they know themselves. Misreading their intentions can cost generations of peace. Study their actual behavior, not what you hope or assume they'll do. Truman's Cold War struggles would be echoed in Dwight D. Eisenhower's battle with internal threats. Dwight D. Eisenhower was the supreme Allied commander who defeated Nazi Germany. He brought steady leadership during the early Cold War years. Eisenhower waited too long to publicly oppose Senator McCarthy's communist witch hunts, allowing fear and paranoia to damage American democracy. By the time he acted, the damage was done. The objection many make is, sometimes you need to wait for the right moment to strike, but confront dangerous movements early. What starts as a small fire can burn down the whole house if ignored. Eisenhower's delayed response stands in contrast to John F. Kennedy's failure to vet his advisors. John F. Kennedy was young, charismatic, and bold. He inspired a generation with his vision of putting a man on the moon and creating the Peace Corps. Just months into office, Kennedy approved the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion based on terrible CIA advice, suffering a humiliating defeat. The experts he trusted were dead wrong. The social pressure he faced is one we all know. Deferring to people with impressive credentials and confident presentations. Vet your advisors rigorously. The people giving you advice can make or break your biggest moves. Kennedy's foreign policy blunder would be dwarfed by Lyndon B. Johnson's escalation in Vietnam. Lyndon B. Johnson was a master of the Senate who used his political skills to pass landmark civil rights legislation and create Medicare. He dreamed of building a great society. Johnson escalated the Vietnam War far beyond what Kennedy had planned, sending hundreds of thousands of troops into a conflict we couldn't win. His refusal to walk away cost over 58,000 American lives. He struggled with sunk cost fallacy. The more lives and money invested, the harder it became to admit the strategy wasn't working. Know when to fold. Sometimes cutting your losses is the strongest move you can make. The true measure of leadership isn't doubling down on mistakes. It's having the courage to change course when the facts change. Johnson's Vietnam mess contrasts with Richard Nixon's more personal destruction. Richard Nixon was a brilliant foreign policy strategist who opened relations with China. He had one of the sharpest minds to ever occupy the Oval Office. Nixon's involvement in the Watergate cover-up destroyed his presidency and forced him to resign in disgrace. His intelligence couldn't save him from his own moral failures. His ultimate downfall? Believing that because he was fighting for what he saw as a greater good, the rules didn't apply to him. Never trade integrity for power. Once your character is compromised, all your achievements turn to ash. No victory is worth winning if you lose yourself in the process. Nixon's cover-up led to Gerald Ford's painful decision about accountability. Gerald Ford was the only president never elected as president or vice president. He brought calm after Watergate, but faced a critical decision about his predecessor. Ford pardoned Nixon to help the country move forward, but the decision was deeply unpopular. He faced widespread backlash, and it likely cost him re-election. He chose what he thought was right over what was good for his career, but the cost was regretful. Sometimes doing the right thing means paying a heavy personal price. The true test of leadership isn't making popular decisions, it's making necessary ones, even when they cost you personally. Ford's controversial pardon contrasts with Jimmy Carter's failure to prepare for worst-case scenarios. Jimmy Carter was an engineer and peanut farmer with a strong moral compass. He emphasized human rights in American foreign policy for the first time. Carter was blindsided by the Iran hostage crisis and couldn't bring the American hostages home, appearing weak and ineffective. His inability to resolve the crisis caused the death of 8 Americans and doomed his presidency. The lesson? Always prepare for worst-case scenarios. Hope isn't a strategy when lives are at stake. Carter's crisis management struggles would be followed by Ronald Reagan's scandal. Ronald Reagan was a former actor who transformed American politics. He projected strength and optimism during the final years of the Cold War. Reagan's administration secretly sold weapons to Iran and used the money to fund rebels in Nicaragua against Congress's direct orders. The Iran-Contra scandal tarnished his legacy and nearly led to impeachment. The systemic pressure was intense. The Cold War created a mindset that any means were justified to fight communism. Keep your operations clean. Cutting corners and breaking rules will eventually catch up with you. No cause is so righteous that it justifies abandoning the principles you claim to be fighting for. Reagan's secret dealings contrast with George H.W. Bush's broken promise. George H.W. Bush was a World War II hero who led America through the collapse of the Soviet Union and the First Gulf War. He was one of our most experienced presidents. Despite his famous "read my lips, no new taxes" pledge, Bush raised taxes when he felt it was necessary for the country. That single broken promise likely cost him re-election. You could make the argument that leaders should change course when circumstances change. Yes, but your word is your bond. Breaking a clear promise can destroy trust that took years to build. If you absolutely must break a promise, acknowledge it directly, explain why, and take full responsibility instead of trying to rationalize or redefine what you meant. Bush's domestic struggles contrast with Bill Clinton's foreign policy blind spot. Bill Clinton was a charismatic leader who presided over peace and prosperity. He was known as the comeback kid for his political resilience. Clinton failed to intervene in the Rwandan genocide, later calling it his greatest regret as president. His inaction contributed to the deaths of 800,000 people in just 100 days. When lives hang in the balance, action beats caution. Some situations demand immediate intervention, not careful deliberation. The warning signs of impending catastrophe are often clear if you're willing to see them. Don't wait for perfect certainty when the cost of delay is measured in human lives. Clinton's foreign policy regret differs from George W. Bush's legislative failure. Despite personal conviction on immigration reform, President Bush couldn't get his own party to support his plan, missing a chance to fix a broken system. He failed to use his political capital on an issue he truly cared about. The social pressure was powerful. His base was turning against immigrants, and he chose not to confront them. Fight hardest for what defines you? Your legacy depends on winning the battles that matter most to your core beliefs. When you compromise on your deepest convictions for political convenience, you win elections but lose your reason for wanting to win them. Bush's missed legislative opportunity contrasts with Barack Obama's follow-through failure. Barack Obama was America's first black president. He came to office during the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Obama's intervention in Libya helped remove dictator Muammar Gaddafi, but left behind a failed state when America didn't stay engaged. His lead-from-behind approach created a power vacuum filled by terrorists and warlords. The objection many make is, we can't be the world's police forever. But finishing what you start matters. Half efforts often create bigger problems than the ones you tried to solve. Obama's foreign policy challenge would be followed by Donald Trump's communication regret. Donald Trump was a businessman and media personality who shocked the world by winning the presidency. He took an unconventional approach to leadership. Trump's confrontational rhetoric divided Americans and made it harder to unite the country during crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. His words often undermined his own policy goals. Unity magnifies power, but when you're fighting half the country, you're operating at half strength. The most powerful words in leadership aren't attacks on opponents, but messages that bring people together around shared purpose. Trump's polarizing approach contrasts with Joe Biden's struggle against misinformation. Joe Biden was one of the most experienced presidents ever, serving 36 years in the Senate and 8 years as vice president before winning the White House. But Biden struggled to counter the spread of misinformation, allowing false narratives to take hold and damage his agenda. In today's world, controlling the narrative is as important as the policies themselves. The systemic obstacle is massive, a fragmented media environment where lies travel faster than truth. Win the information war or lose the real one. Perception often matters more than reality in the fight for hearts and minds. In a world of instant communication, you must define yourself and your actions clearly before others define them for you. Now we can learn a lot from our president's biggest regrets, but if you want uncommon life advice from each of our presidents, watch this video next.